Also 9:30, so we'll go ahead and start the meeting. I want to welcome everybody to our April 14th ITOC meeting. We have a full agenda today, so we'll go ahead and get started. We've switched up the minutes. I hope everybody had a chance to see that. That would be part of the consent calendar, so that'll be a bit different. Before we get started, just for the record, we do have a quorum. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair, we do.
All right, thank you very much. I will give Ariana an opportunity to explain how we will participate in the meeting today. So Ariana, if you could do that, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair Kenny. The members will be using their cameras. We will take live public comments, and members are asked to turn on their cameras whenever they have a comment or question, and then Chair Kenny will recognize you. Noted on the cover page of today's meeting agenda, it shows that in addition to emailing comments, the public can also provide comments live during today's meeting. And in order for the public to provide live comments, you can join today's Zoom meeting through the link, or you can dial one of the numbers from your phone, and those are provided on the cover page of today's meeting agenda. You can join the meeting by clicking on Join Webinar, and then that is provided in the confirmation email that you will receive upon registering. And when public comments are called for on an item on the Zoom platform, please click the raise hand icon in the Zoom toolbar. The chair will call on you by the name you provided, and if you are participating by telephone, please press *9, and the chair will call on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number. The instructions for providing live comments are also on the bottom of the cover page of today's meeting agenda, and that can be accessed from the homepage of SANDAG's website at www.sandag.org. And all comments, whether emailed or live, those will be made a part of today's meeting record. Thank you, Chair Kenny.
All right, well, thank you very much. Let's go ahead and get started with item number 1. Item number 1 is public comment. This would be for any items that are not on the agenda today. Francesca, are there any members of the public who would like to speak on items that are not on the agenda?
No, Chair, I don't see any hands from the public.
Thank you very much. Are there any members of the committee who would like to make any initial comments? All right, seeing no hands, we will go ahead and move on to item number 2, which is the Executive Director's Report. Director Accarda, how are you?
Kenny, thank you very much, and good morning to all of you. Good to see you. And again, I want to thank Brad for his service for the region and for the committee. At the last week's Board of Directors meeting, we had a panel of experts discuss technology future mobility and how is the next 20 years would look like, given that we have been overtaken by the Internet of Things, the big data, and artificial intelligence. And I think it's almost impossible to guess the future, but judging by what happened in the last 10 years when it comes to technology, transportation is no difference. I think what worked 20 years ago is not going to work, probably mostly 10 years from now. That's why our 5 big moves heavily rely on data and heavily anticipate future technologies the way they are reforming right now. Last week, we heard from outside experts with Ford, motor companies, Qualcomm, and Aspire, and had a robust discussion about what's the expectation for transportation. So imagine if 10 years from now, we mostly look at transportation as a service, as a utility, that we subscribe to some like we do for electricity and water, and we pay base costs and the costs keep adding. That's actually becoming a very popular business in Europe right now, where transportation is viewed as a service, mobility as a service. You pay a base cost for certain travel, and that cost gets associated whether you're driving electric vehicles, you're sharing a ride, the kind of three revolution, the shared electric vehicle that Dan Sterling from UC Davis talked about. So I think the discussion was good. I think we're still trying to figure out how we incorporate some of these technological ideas in the regional transportation plan and the 5 big moves. And we're getting very close to start talking some specifics of how we do that. Let me talk a little bit about President Biden infrastructure plan. As you know, the Biden administration announced its infrastructure plan recently. And the American Job Plan, as it's called, aligns exactly with the work we're doing here at Sandag. Actually, we're a little bit ahead of the game because all the categories for this massive infrastructure plan is categories we spoke about in the 5 big moves, whether it's the infrastructure in general for transit, the fixed fares for the highways, the electric vehicle, future mobilities, the digital divide. I think just like the principle in President Biden plan, Sandag is truly planning for tomorrow's mobility system, focusing on equity, climate, and building the economy. We see connection to many aspects of the Sandag's work. This includes also our 5 priority project, the Otay 2 border crossing, which spelled out, port of entry spelled out in the plan, the Central Mobility Hub, the regional plan, the Mid-Coast Rally, and our work to stabilize the Del Mar Bluff and improve the Los Angeles corridor. And that include moving the bluff and moving the tracks from the bluff inland. I think it's fair to say we are positioned to compete well for President Biden's plan as a region. And right now, depending how this plan comes out, we do have 120 projects ready to move forward in the next 18 months alone, worth $1.9 billion, in addition to these mega projects that we hope is going to be in the mix. We anticipate working with our congressional delegation, which we already met, to make sure the region is ready to participate in this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. We spoke earlier about the Del Mar Bluff stabilization. Our teams continue to work with NCTD on emergency repair to the rail wall. Last weekend, there were a full rail closure between Oceanside and downtown San Diego, while crews continue to make important emergency work. There will be another closure this weekend, and this work continues, and additional closure are planned for the weekends of April 24th and May 1st. This closure will allow us to complete the work that we intend to do. We continue to coordinate with NCTD, the City of Del Mar, California State Parks, and the Sheriff's Department to ensure beachgoers are aware of the danger bluff collapses pose. The emergency repair will continue through July. As you know, last week, the California Transportation Commission allocated $2.5 million for this work. We're very grateful to the commission and to the state for doing that. Whether the $10.5 million is enough, Jim's engineers is going to tell us that very shortly, but that's great news that we were able to immediately get the CTC to allocate that money. Mid-Coast Rally, you know, we're getting very close. Opening later this year, you're going to see these beautiful red cars start operating in the summer for trials. Stations are getting done. Major construction the majority of the construction is completed. They are, final touches. We're working with Caltrans to align the roadway, which will provide direct access to the future UC San Diego Hills La Jolla Trolley Station. But I think this project, the largest infrastructure project in San Diego history, when it comes to transportation, is on budget, on schedule, and the FTA, Federal Transit Administration, still call it the gold star. We're gonna see a lot of celebrations for this project. I think this project is gonna transformational, and this is just for San Diego, and this is just a teaser for what the 5 big moves could do to this region. Chair Kenny, that concludes my report. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Director Ricardo. Do we have any questions from the general public for the director?
No,
Francesca?
Chair, I don't see any hands.
Perfect. Let's take it up to the committee. Are there any members of the committee that had any questions for the director? Brad, this is your last chance. So
I won't.
any
Hassan, thank you very much. That's always a good presentation you do. We appreciate you doing this. Gary did a good job coming to this a lot, and Kim Kawada, and thank you for doing that. I do have one it's a question related to, and Jim Lithicum knows that I was going to ask this. It's a little off subject from what you were talking about. There's an issue related to an RFP that's been put out for labor compliance and project labor agreement administrator consulting services. And I sort of want to ask, with what we approved last month on the increase of administration fees for you all for costs 1% to 2%, I asked the question if this is going to affect the upcoming construction projects and projects promised to voters. The question is the PLA issue is being discussed for a possible measure that might be on the ballot in 2022 for the 5 big moves, and so this is a $2.8 million procurement for a service that is not even being considered until a ballot. The PLA, if it happens, this board hasn't voted on it, but this is 18 to 24 months out before a PLA would be put in place. Does Sandag have a procurement out for $2.8 million for something that's not even necessary?
Great question, Brad. First of all, I'm gonna come back so you don't think I hide from answering the question, but I'm gonna start with Jim to just technically say what this is part of. I mean, this, the way we do procurement, it's not just one thing. So Jim, why don't you address that, and then I'll come back to you, Brad.
Yeah, Brad. So what we do almost everything via on-call consultant services, because that's way more efficient than issuing a service contract or a consultant contract project by project by project. And so this requires this. I'm just calling up this this procurement, and it's other things in addition to PLAs. But one of the things, there's so much chatter about PLAs amongst our board members in the community, what other jurisdictions are doing. And so what we need to do as staff is we need to get up to speed. We need to be able to answer the questions from folks like you and our board members and other policymakers. And this will bring us that expertise that we can gain. But there's other things like it's going to help us with Davis-Bacon and apprenticeship requirements and other laws and regulations and things like that. So PLA administration, it's sort of a broad umbrella. The first thing we need to do is be able to answer our board members about what their questions are. So we need to develop a certain level of expertise.
So Brad, I think it's an excellent question from the standpoint is, this is a new territory for Sandag. So last week, the board had a robust discussion, and there were a lot of questions that actually a lot of people don't know the answer to. I can tell you from experiences in LA that it took the region many years to get to a point where people are working together toward one goal. And I am definitely glad that the discussion is starting. we're not starting work just to do that specific thing, but to be ready to answer the questions that were posed not only at the board meeting last week, but for many times to go. I believe it's beneficial to the region to put this on the table and start discussing it, because I believe at the end of the day, all stakeholders, labor, unions, have to come together. Otherwise, there is no chance for us to do anything. And so, you know, I got an email, a request to know why we're starting this prematurely, and I want to investigate some more. But this is to me the part of many other things that we're having on call for. Wasn't just specifically because the PLA discussion was taking place last week.
I think that was a good discussion, Hassan, last week, but you could tell, I mean, I know we're not on the subject today on this with ITOC. It is an ITOC issue in the sense of the taxpayers. And I don't know if my fellow board members want to comment, but this is $2 million on an issue that, I mean, Jim said it, but it's a political issue that's coming forward somewhere along the line that maybe the ITOC should look at, because I've been involved in this in school districts, and it's always been a political decision, Hassan. And
Yes,
so
sure.
someone needs to, and it's coming, someone needs to explain to the public a little bit better about sort of what's happening behind the scenes. But you know, this is my last meeting, so I'm able to say this. So
yeah, and Brad will be happy to agendize it for a more discussion of the ITAC if that's what the chair and the members want. We're absolutely, I am not one who wants to shy away from difficult discussions, because I do believe the region need to discuss it. Staff, you know, is trying to be ready, but you're like Jim said, and I don't know the greatest detail yet. This is part of other stuff that we need to have on call for, not just the PLA discussion.
Got it. Stuart, I mean, I look to you a little bit because you've seen the history of some of this in the last 2 years with some of this. It seems to be a little premature for Sandag to be putting this out. And I just wanted to raise that at ITOC here. So,
well, if I could, to make sure I'm understanding this clearly, it sounded to me, Brad, as if you were asking if there were monies going to be spent relating to PLA administration prior to the board approving the concept of PLAs themselves. And I kind of heard Jim and I think Hassan say that this is really not money that will be spent on administration of PLAs before the board has approved them, but rather sort of the groundwork to prepare the agency to you know, appropriately discuss with the appropriate expertise the questions that will come as the decisions are going to be made. And so, correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's correct. I mean, we're not you know, bringing in consultant. We're doing an on-call to get ready to answer questions that might come, and not only on PLAs, but the partnership, other issues that deal with labor issues. So yes, you are correct, Mr. Halpern.
well, Stuart, let me just close. And Hassan, maybe we can do this. Is there a commitment from the leadership of Sandag to, with this consultant, to discuss with all sides workshops, things like that, and not set this up for sort of a PLA in advance of a ballot measure? So
I'm almost certain the leadership would agree that we should have discussion with all sides. As difficult as the discussion might be, you know, anything that doesn't have a public policy debate is going to end up not being complete. So you have my commitment with my team that we will be talking to all sides about the issues, and I'm sure the leadership will be there too.
well, thank you, Jim, for your feedback on this. I appreciate it. Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this.
Certainly. So amongst the committee members, is there some direction we'd like to give staff to bring this issue back with some more detail? I trust you would do that anyway at some point. I guess when would we hear about this next? Might be a better question. Mr. Linthicum.
So what happened last Friday at the board was they directed us to investigate, to not even investigate, consider a whole laundry list of things. I think there was 8 items in it, of which a project labor agreement was one of them. And so we need to educate ourselves and get direction from the board on what that all means. And so along with everything else that was in that list of items from Councilmember Shu.
All right, so how
Just
about
Chair Kenny, to add to what Jim said, the direction from the board wasn't like saying this is the only thing you're going to look at. I mean, it's really and it does not exclude things, but it did pretty much ask a lot of questions that staff need to come back and answer, and we will not be doing our job if we do not. But having said that, to the point, if I think if the ITOC, which I believe it should, we would be happy to come back anytime you feel appropriate to discuss whatever the board resolution mean and whatever staff answering questions means. I think you will benefit from that discussion. So we're at your disposal. You tell us when. I believe right now we don't have still the on-call. It's an RFP out, but once we're comfortable, we'll be happy to come to the committee. And like Brad said, we're willing to discuss this not only with our own committees, but with the stakeholders. As difficult as that discussion might be, it's a necessary discussion a region must have.
fair enough?
And Mr. Chair, lastly, this is on a project labor agreement. It has to do with just how the work is going to be put out and the type of construction program and impact to employers, employees, and it does impact taxpayers. So I think that's the reason I wanted ITOC to hear about this. And it's happening in school districts where their independent oversight committees are taking input as well. So this is not new for oversight committees.
Correct.
And let me just to mention something important for the committee members. I think maybe you're aware, maybe not. We already have, statutory mandates under a certain state. I think it's AB 2731 that we just passed. This is the one for the CEQA streamlining for the airport project. We already on the books as a law are required to talk about a potential PLA. It is not based on a future ballot measure necessarily. It is based on what we already passed. If you look at AB 2731, which was authored by Assembly Member Tadi Gloria, or Mayor Gloria now, and it was the first in its kind in the history of San Diego, and the second in the state of California. It did require us to look at PLA. So we're exploring all of those things, not necessarily just for the measure, just so the committee member knows.
Thank you. Stuart, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So just for clarification, is what's going to happen that there is going to be, in effect, a study that by some point in time, the study will be concluded and then there'll be a presentation of findings, if you will, or recommendations? Or is this really more of a process of education and that won't have a very discrete ending point? Because I'm wondering if there's a fact finding, then it would be pretty straightforward. It seems that at the end of that investigation, we could schedule a presentation. Brad, as a public member, can come and comment, et cetera. But
it's more the latter, Stuart. It's a process. But honestly, we're trying to build the agency's knowledge of these things that haven't been there before and hasn't been widely discussed. And especially now that we have bills signed by the governor become a state law, that's going to require us to do certain things. We can't ignore that. So it's a process, and that process started last week with the board last year with the bill, and the last week with the board discussion. But it's a process that's going to take a while, and the region need to be committed to having a good public policy debate about it. Jim, did I? If you want to disagree with me, totally fine.
No, that I think we're on the exact same page.
Yeah, okay.
It's we need to discover what they're figure out and be able to educate our board on what this is and what does it mean. Because like Brad said, a lot of school districts have PLAs, that's vertical construction, and that's a certain type of industry that does those projects versus heavy civil construction, a different type of industry. And so when they ask us questions, well, how does that impact your pool of contractors? Well, we need to be able to answer them. What does it mean as far as, already there's, Davis-Bacon and prevailing wage and subcontractors, and how does it impact DBEs, and what's the experience of other public agencies? So we're just behind the curve. Like Hassan said, in Los Angeles, it took many years to figure it out, and they have. So they're a great resource to us, just a little bit up the road to try to learn more about these things.
And by the way, for I know this is not the topic, but because Brad last meeting, we're giving him more information than he needs. Some of the debates I've been part of for the last couple of decades is, the first thing people say when they hear PLA, oh my God, it's going to raise the cost of the project. And that might be the case. But there's also the other side. And it might help create careers that otherwise won't be there. Like Jim just said, there's all different kind of PLAs. It's not just a one size fits all. That I think we need to educate ourselves. I think we need to debate the issue. And I commit to you that all stakeholders will be part of this discussion.
Thanks, Hassan. Thank you, Jim.
All right, one last check for hands. Any other questions for the director from the committee members? All right, seeing none, I'd like to thank you very much for the presentation, and we will go ahead and move on to our next item on the agenda. This is our consent calendar, items 3 through 6. I believe item 3 is the minutes from the last meeting, and that requires approval, and the remaining 4 items, I believe, are information only items. Are there any members of the public who want to speak on any of these items? Francesca.
No, Chair, I don't see any hands from the public.
All right, so for comments from committee or perhaps a motion?
I would move to approve.
Okay, we have a motion to approve and a second.
I second.
And a second from the vice chair. Francesca, if you could call for the vote, please.
Thank you, Chair. For real estate right-of-way acquisition, Jonathan Frankel.
Yes.
Thank you. For licensed civil traffic engineer, Chair Kenny.
Yes.
Thank you. For contractor construction, Brad Barnum.
Yes.
Thank you. For biology environmental, Dustin Fuller.
Yes.
Thank you. For finance budgeting, Stuart Halpern.
Yes, and for clarity, we actually have 2 sets of minutes. I don't know if my motion should cover both or if it's the whole consent, but just make sure everybody's clear on that.
Thank you. Do we have someone from legal that can weigh in on that?
I'm far from legal advice, but the motion is to move the consent calendar. So.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you, Chair. For licensed engineer Les Hopper.
Approve.
Thank you. And for CEO private sector, Vice Chair House.
Approved.
Thank you. And that does pass unanimously.
All right, thank you very much. With that, we will move on to our next item, which we have alluded to earlier in the meeting. This is a recognition of one of our outgoing members. Brad Barnum has been serving on the ITOC for many, many years. And we'd just like to take a moment to say goodbye to our very outstanding and dedicated, valuable member of this committee. Brad Barnum has served on the committee for the past 8 years, advocating for projects such as the Mid-Coast, and also has been a proponent of the CM's GC methodology. Brad served in several capacities such as chair, vice chair of the ITOC, chair of the audit committee, and several of the ITOC subcommittees. Brad will be sorely missed. Brad, we wish you the very best, sir, and thank you very much for your service. With that, I suppose, are there any members of the public who would like to speak on this issue?
No, Chair, I don't see any hands.
Well, they're missing out. All right, so we'll take it back to committee. Are there
I don't
any?
need any comments from anybody. Come on. We need to move through the agenda here.
All right, hey, it's on the agenda. We have to give it its fair shake. All right, with that, I'd like just to offer personal thanks, Brad. Well done, and wish you the best in future endeavors. Okay, with
Thanks.
that.
Thanks, Mike. I do want to say thanks for everybody. And I do want to thank staff. I think I met Ariana when I first went through the interview process. And I still remember standing there waiting to be interviewed and all that. So you guys have done a great job. I'll tell you, the organization of Sandag's ITOC staff and in general, and then the oversight, the performance audit that I was involved in when I chaired, and then the last few have been, in general, the auditors have said that the staff does a great job, and I've always appreciated it. And as chair, you all helped me, and with Jose and Ariana leading the charge on that. So, and then fellow board ITOC members, I've always appreciated your support, and Stuart, I've enjoyed going head to head with you on this political stuff. So I am retiring from the AGC on June 30th. Some of you may not know that. So I'm going to take a break and figure out what I'm going to do next. So best wishes going forward.
All right.
Thank you.
Brad. Okay, with that, we will go ahead and move on to item number 8, which is an update on the actions by the Transportation Committee and the Board of Directors on TransNet-related items from Ms. Cerniden Ariana.
Thank you, Chair Kenny. So I do have an update. So since your March 10th meeting, the board approved the waiver of the time extension amendments for Sandag grant programs due to COVID. And then they also approved an increase to the borrowing limit for the commercial paper program for up to 200 million. The board has been provided with several presentations regarding the regional plan, and you'll be hearing more about the regional plan at your meeting in May. On March 26th, the board also approved the draft budget, which included the proposed amendment to the ordinance, which is also was on your consent agenda today, and you held a special meeting on. And then in addition, our ITOC chair introduced to the Transportation Committee your performance audit. There were mainly questions about process and how and when audit recommendations would be implemented. And the next step is for your auditors to present the performance audit to the audit committee. That'll happen on April 23rd. And then staff is set to return to your June meeting for approval of your final audit report, which will then be presented as part of your annual report to the board also in June. The Transportation Committee also heard the fiscal and compliance audit results for FY20 and the transit operator requests for funding eligibility exceptions. There was a lot of discussion at Transportation Committee surrounding the request for exception. You'll recall that in order for our transit operators to receive their full TransNet annual apportionments, the operating costs cannot exceed the increase in CPI over the same period, and the ordinance does allow for exceptions to that. They can exclude cost increases that are outside of their control, for example, or they can calculate the requirement as an average over the previous 3 fiscal years. The comments from the Transportation Committee members were mainly along the lines of having staff provide more historical information by agency requests in future reports going forward. And that would be to provide greater context, and so that more informed decisions can be made. And then similar to comments that we received from ITOC at your March meeting, as part of this item, we heard that it's clear that obviously 2021 was unusual, but that taking a more critical look, for example, at pension items, which are certainly out of an operator's control, but not unpredictable, may be called for. And how do the transit operators, you as the ITOC, the Transportation Committee, and the board do a responsible job of managing and overseeing without going through an exception process, which is currently required. And I'd just like to note that at the state level, some of these discussions are happening as well on the Transportation Development Act, or TDA side, for performance metrics under that program. Those performance metrics are being revisited. There's actually a reform task force, and many TransNet requirements for transit are also modeled after the TDA statute. So the agency does have a seat at the table along with our transit operator partners in those conversations. And as we bring potential amendments, ordinance amendments based on your latest and prior performance audit recommendations, we can bring something to address this forward to you as well in the future. So those are my comments for today, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions for you.
Well, thank you very much, Ariana. Clerk, are there any members of the public who would like to comment on that?
No, Chair, I don't see any hands.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Ariana from the committee members? Let me look for hands real quick. Where'd everybody go? Well, I don't see any hands raised. I did have a question myself. So the issues with the exceptions related to the transit agencies, the discussions we've had in the past have always been within the framework of the transit ordinance, and how can we meet our commitments and accommodate the agencies the best we can. If there's going to be changes to the ordinance, then we might have a broader discussion. When would any changes to the ordinance occur, and would we be discussing this in advance of that, or could we discuss this in advance of that and maybe push this issue into that ordinance change?
Yeah, absolutely. So staff is currently taking a look at kind of the lower hanging fruit from your latest performance audit, as well as working on implementation of your FY18 performance audit recommendations. So, hopefully sometime this summer, we will be able to come back with an update, an overall update kind of on our plan moving forward for implementation of some of those recommendations, which some of those, would potentially involve an ordinance amendment. In terms of the timing, I think, to the extent that we can cobble together various amendments so that we're not having to bring, multiple amendments. And then there's also, of course, the regional plan adoption, which will potentially also mean there could be some ordinance amendments coming out of that. So the timing is still a question mark, but we will definitely be bringing updates to you on each of these, going forward, and hopefully soon.
All right. I see Stuart has a hand raised. Stuart?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. On that same subject, Ariana, I think if you could maybe dig through the files, you may recall that I think it was about 3, maybe even 4 years ago, when Dick Wortman was still on the committee, we did have a sort of an ad hoc subcommittee to talk through this issue. You're nodding, maybe you recall that. And it would just be interesting if there's actual meeting notes to refresh ourselves on the deliberations at that time, because I know we had at least 1 or 2 all hands meeting, including representatives from the agencies, I believe even perhaps our auditors, if I'm not mistaken. But in any case, that might be helpful for informing the discussion as well.
Yes, and thank you for bringing that up again. So definitely there were meetings, and I believe staff was involved, transit operators, auditors, with regard to this particular transit exception request item, and we do have some of those notes for sure. We can maybe as part of next year's item, bring that historical, perspective, so that there is more context. So, based on the comments that we received at the Transportation Committee and from this body, so that, you can see the history for each agency's request, for example, what CPI was at the time, what justification they use, those kinds of things, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, if there's a decision point coming, it might also be helpful, as we did last time, because there is a bit of some technical sort of, granular stuff in this that we decided last time around to convene an ad hoc subcommittee that could really spend the time, as opposed to, the less amount of time that's feasible to do in one of the full committee meetings. So just something to consider also, that if there is a point in time that you're looking to have a decision, it might be something for the committee to consider having an ad hoc subcommittee to be able to dive in deeper again. Because I totally agree that, the view that emerged 3 years or so ago, that was then, this is now. And so it's certainly relevant to take a look at it. But as I recall the process, there's a lot of information. It sort of took a bunch of time to really wade through it.
Yeah, and I would also throw out that the changes being considered at the state level, those discussions have been happening for a couple of years now, maybe. Due to COVID, they were, maybe didn't progress as quickly as was originally envisioned. But it would be nice to have the outcome of those discussions to help inform, what changes could be made to the ordinance as well. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as well. But yes, absolutely, we can, we're open to, forming another subcommittee of the ITOC as this committee sees fit. So.
Well, and also bear in mind that I think the only 2 people that were on the ITOC at the time were Stuart and Dustin. So it would be information for the rest of us who are newer to the committee about what had happened. So whenever either of those 2 items come back up, either the change at the state level and there's more information, or the ordinance cleanup comes forward, maybe if we could just get out in front of those 2 issues or get a little bit more information about that.
Yes, absolutely.
Any other questions for Ariana from the committee members? I see no hands, so I will thank you very much for the presentation. The committee will receive and file that issue, and we will move on to our next agenda item. This is I believe, a presentation on the TransNet Environmental Mitigation program, the Land Management Grant Program, call for projects for the 10th cycle of grant funding. So Kim Smith, take it away.
Good morning. Good morning, Chair Kenny and members of the ITOC. My name is Kim Smith, and I'm the project manager for the Environmental Mitigation Program here at Sandag. Also here today is Courtney Pesh, and she is a new regional planner working under the EMP program. Today, our presentation will focus on the EMP Land Management Grant Program, specifically the proposed 10th cycle of land management grants under the EMP program. And so now I'm going to turn over the presentation to Courtney.
Thank you, Kim, and good morning, ITOC. Item 9 on your agenda is on page 71, and it outlines the eligibility, submittal, and evaluation criteria for the proposed 10th cycle of competitive land management grants to implement the TransNet Environmental Mitigation Program, also known as the EMP. Next slide, please. Today's request focuses on the Habitat Conservation Fund. This is the funding for the regional land management and biological provisions of the EMP. The EMP is implemented through a strategy outlined in the Memorandum of Agreement that was signed by Sandag, Caltrans, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 2008, and was most recently renewed in May of 2019. The MOA allocates $4 million per year for 20 years to assist in funding in gaps in the regional land management and biological monitoring to maintain the regional preserve system. This funding provides a safety net to protect our investments, and in turn helps to avoid the listing of endangered species and reduces mitigation and permitting costs. Per the MOA, annual allocations for each fiscal year totaling $4 million are reviewed and approved by the Sandag board. This allows the board of directors to make modifications and make any necessary adjustments to this funding. The work is then implemented through consultant contracts and to the land management grant program. Next slide, please. The purpose of the land management grant program is to assist regional land managers with the protection of threatened, rare, and endangered species and enhance their habitats to avoid future listing of endangered species while promoting regional habitat conservation planning. There have been 9 previous grant cycles with a total of 117 grants through a competitive process. Approximately $16.4 million in funding has been awarded, and an additional $10.1 million in matching funds has been provided by grantees. Past projects have included signage, fencing, and directional walkways to protect existing habitats and species, reintroduction of endangered species, exotic species removal, and the recovery of habitat previously burned from wildfires. The location of the projects funded through these grants are shown on the map above. The EMP working group and SANDAG staff are recommending a 10 cycle of land management grants. Next slide, please. The 2 grant funding categories for the land management grant program are on the slide above. The fiscal year 2021 and 2022 work plan for the EMP regional management and monitoring includes approximately $2.4 million to implement the 10 cycle of land management grants. An ad hoc committee of the EMP working group met to discuss the next cycle of land management grants this past January and determined that for the land management grants to be the most effective at achieving regional conservation goals, $800,000 should be allocated to fill existing funding gaps to assist with land managers with short-term stewardship activities, while $1.6 million should be allocated for longer-term, larger-scale habitat restoration and enhancement projects. Projects in the threat reduction stewardship category, located on the left of your screen, are short-term projects in need of one-time funding necessary to fill existing budget gaps for specific tasks. Projects should be completed within 18 months and can be awarded a maximum of $80,000 each. The recommendation for the $80,000 funding cap will allow SANDAG to grant multiple small awards to a greater number of grantees. Projects in the species and habitat recovery category, located on the right of your screen, are longer-term projects that focus on habitat restoration and enhancement with an emphasis on management strategic plan priority species and their habitats. Projects can be awarded a maximum of $1.6 million and should be completed within 3 to 5 years. The funding cap of $1.6 million was chosen to provide maximum flexibility in funding for potential projects in this category. Eligible activities covered under these funding categories include management stewardship actions to reduce threats to endangered and threatened species and their habitats, control of invasive plant and animal species, and planting and seeding of areas with native vegetation, signage and directional fencing, and access control. Grant applications for both funding categories will be evaluated based on how they address high priority species and their habitats. If success criteria for the project has been identified, and if success of the project is likely. The availability of matching funds will also be used as an evaluation criteria for projects in the species and habitat recovery category. The evaluation criteria for both grant categories remains consistent with the 9th cycle of land management grants, with the exception of new criterion added, which was added to both categories, located on pages 77 and 78 of your agenda. In accordance with SANDAG's new commitment to equity statement, approved by the Board of Directors this past February, the EMP working group added evaluating language that scores projects higher for incorporating or providing potential co-benefits to surrounding communities and fostering social equity. Examples include restoring open space in disadvantaged communities, providing educational opportunities for disadvantaged populations, employing the California Conservation Corps to conduct invasive species removal, etc. Next slide, please. So what are our next steps? The information presented to you today will also be shared with the Board of Directors this upcoming June. If the Board of Directors approves the eligibility, submittal, and evaluation criteria for the land management grants, the call for projects is then anticipated to be released sometime in July, and a public workshop will be scheduled near that time to address questions for potential applicants. Grant applications will be due in October, and application review will follow in November. Staff will present the evaluation committee's recommendations for award to the ITOC, RPC, TC, and Board of Directors in the spring of 2022. And it is expected that grant agreements will be executed sometime the summer of 2022. Next slide, please. Therefore, the ITOC is asked to review the eligibility, submittal, and evaluation criteria for the next call for projects of the TransNet Environmental Mitigation Program, Land Management Grant Program, and provide any input to the Sandag Board of Directors. That concludes our presentation, and Kim and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
All right, Courtney, well, thank you very much and welcome. How new are you?
I have been at Sandag since 2018 as an intern, but most recently in my newer position as a regional planner one since last October.
Congratulations. And that was a good presentation. For the clerk, do we have any members of the public who would like to comment on this?
No, Chair, I don't see any hands from the public.
All right, thank you very much. And we'll take it back to committee. Are there any members of the committee who have questions for our presenters? Dustin Fuller, I saw your hand go up.
Yes, I don't have a question. I just wanted to thank Courtney and Kim for their work and appreciate working with that EMP work group. It's a diverse group and coming to consensus is not always easy. So thank you for your work on this.
Stuart, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the presentation and as was just pointing out the comprehensiveness of the work. The one question I have is on the new criteria, just for sake of clarification, the reference to the educational opportunity, is that education in the broadest sense or is that intended to mean environment conservation oriented education?
Thank you. For how we interpreted it when we met with the ad hoc committee was lots of projects that we've had over the previous 9 cycles have hosted schools and small classroom field trips to any outdoor activities, let it be conservation work, open space, trail work. So we were incorporating that into the next scoring cycle. If any of that is added to your project or the scope of work, then that could be considered a higher score for that particular item. And I'm sure Kim also might have more specifics on this as well.
Yeah, I think our education, Stuart, I think you hit on it, but it's more for, our conservation in San Diego County, regional conservation, education of what species, habitats we have, just within our neighborhoods here. So I think it would definitely be towards conservation.
Yeah, if I could just then elaborate, I think for sake of potential grantees, understanding, what's relevant or not, it might be helpful just to clarify that a little bit because, when I read it, I could immediately imagine a certain category of potential grantee who's focused on environmental conservation oriented education, feeling like, hey, this is a great opportunity. Whereas if it's education just very broadly, it may be a little bit confusing to people. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, one more quick look through the list of participants, seeing no more hands. Point of order for Ariana in reviewing the item, we're asked to review eligibility, submittal, and evaluation criteria and provide any input to the board. Is there direction in that for or a request there for a motion? I suppose we can make a motion to recommend it as presented to the board.
This item, Chair Kenny, is for discussion for sure.
So
if the committee chooses to take an action, that's fine, but it's not required.
All right. Hearing no motions coming forth, we'd like to thank you for your presentation, and we'll receive and file that, and we'll wish you the best of the board. With that, we will move on to our next item, which is a presentation by Ms. Barajas. It's the draft concept of the 2021 ITOC annual report.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Here we go. So today I'm bringing you your draft ITOC annual report. Consistent with your role in overseeing the TransNet program, today's item summarizes the ITOC activities for fiscal year 2021. This year's report is geared toward the role of the ITOC, focusing on the results of your performance audit and your fiscal audit. As in years past, the annual report includes a letter from the chair starting on page 1. The letter briefly discusses or addresses the new direction at Sandag with the regional plan and also touches on the COVID-19 pandemic. The report also includes the results of the 5th triennial performance audit. The critical recommendations and key results of the audit are listed on the executive summary beginning on page 2 of the report. On page 4, the key results of the FY20 fiscal audit are provided. We can report that recipient agencies were generally in compliance with the major TransNet provisions with a few exceptions. And other report highlights include TransNet funding highlights on page 5 and continues with the fiscal year 2021 activities and accomplishments of the TransNet program. And lastly, the priority projects are listed towards the back of the report with brief descriptions. And then today, what we're asking from the committee is any input you might have or any revisions. If you haven't had a chance to review the report, the draft report, we can also follow up with emails or phone calls if you prefer. So with that, I'd like to open it up.
Thank you, Ms. Barajas. For the clerk, do we have any members of the public who would like to speak on this issue?
No, Chair, I don't see any hands.
Thank you. I'll take it back to committee. Are there any questions for Ms. Barajas from the committee members? Looking for hands. I don't see it. Oh, there we go. Vice Chair House.
I just have some comments, just editorial. I will send them to Julie.
Thank you. Julie, when is this scheduled to go? Our next stop is at the board, correct?
No, actually, we still have a follow-up meeting with the ITOC next month. And then that'll be basically the final draft. And then we're going for approval in June for the ITOC and then as well as the board.
All right, so we will see this issue twice more at ITOC? Okay, thank you. All right, well, thank you very much for the presentation. Not seeing any more hands from the committee, we will go ahead and receive and file that issue and move on to our next item. This is a presentation by Mr. Radcliffe. Sir, are you ready? I can't hear you.
Okay, so good morning, Chair and members of the ITOC. I'm here today with Amendment 1 to the 2021 Regional Transportation Improvement Program, or RTIP. And on April 23rd, the Sandag Board of Directors is scheduled to approve Amendment 1, and the ITOC is being asked to discuss and review the projects in this proposed amendment, focusing their review on the TransNet funded projects. Amendment 1 is being processed to accommodate the FY 2022 Transit Capital Improvement Program, which adds funding to the 5-year transit program of projects based on federal fiscal year 21 FTA formula fund apportionments and the TransNet revenue estimates that were approved by the board on February 26th. The 5-year transit CIP funds transit improvement projects and operating assistance, state of good repair projects, and bus facilities projects. Attachment 1 on page 107 of the agenda is the summary of changes report showing the prior and revised project costs, the cost difference, and the percent change in each project. Additional explanation has been provided for the significant changes. Representatives from the transit agencies are here to answer any questions about the changes in greater detail. In attachment 2, table 2 of your backup, beginning on page 108 of the agenda, you'll find the changes proposed in the amendment specifically for the projects funded with TransNet. Each project lists TransNet at the top, followed by any other funding programmed on the project. We also show the TransNet subtotals and other subtotals to show you how much TransNet and other funds are programmed. Attachment 3 shows the changes that were made by the transit agencies during the public comment period. The updates were to the FTA 5311 funding, and these updates were made based on the recently released state apportionments. Finally, attachment 4 summarizes the TransNet eligibility analysis for Amendment 1. And that concludes my report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Radcliffe. For the clerk, do we have any members of the public who would like to speak on this issue?
No, Chair, no hands from the public.
Thank you very much. Take it back to committee. Do we have any questions for Mr. Radcliffe from committee members? Scrolling for hands. I don't see any hands. So I'd like to thank you for your presentation today, and the committee will receive and file that report, and we will move on to our next item today, which is item number 12, a Mid-Coast Corridor update from Mr. Rulas. Sir, are you ready?
I am, absolutely. I trust everybody can hear me.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, good morning, Chair Kenny, Vice Chair House, and the ITOC committee members. Today, I'll be presenting you with an update on the Mid-Coast Trolley project. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, the project is an 11-mile extension to existing track from just south of the San Diego River to the terminus at the UTC Transit Center. The project includes construction of 9 new stations, 5 of which include parking, and includes the acquisition of 36 new trolley cars. We've continued to make good progress, even with the challenges of working through the pandemic, and we are on course, as Hassan said earlier, to start revenue service in late 2021 and still expect to finish within a $2.17 billion budget. Next slide, please. So this milestone schedule has been a model of consistency with relatively minor changes from our initial baseline schedule that had been developed towards the latter part of 2016. Our construction contractor, Mid-Coast Transit Constructors, is approaching being 90% complete with construction. The focus of the recent efforts have involved working at all the stations, advancing work associated with the 2 parking structures, punching out the track work, installing landscape and irrigation throughout the alignment, setting overhead catenary wire, and in completing the rail signal work. We anticipate that in a little over 2 months, the overhead catenary will be energized and control of the trackway will be turned over to MTS so they can pull a train out and start performing their initial tests along the entire 11 miles of new track. At around that same time, our contractor intends to have the first 7.5 miles of the alignment totally completed, including all 3 stations, the 2 park and ride lots, and the landscaping too. As we say, they will be done when it comes to the first 7.5 miles. Finally, our communications and community outreach teams have been busy coordinating with their colleagues at MTS and UCSD on the planning efforts for the project's grand opening and ribbon cutting celebration. They've also been busy working on coordinating a number of lead-up events to help generate some excitement and start informing the community that they will soon have a new transportation option for getting to where they want to go. At this time, we are hopeful that COVID-19 will not prevent us from giving this historic project the in-person celebration it deserves. Next slide, please. Despite COVID, the project has continued to be a huge boost to the local economy. So far, it has employed over 4,500 workers on site and has paid over $182 million in wages. Next slide, please. Our prime contractor, MCTC, continues to utilize disadvantaged businesses at a rate that will exceed the established contract goal of 11.3% DBE participation. At the end of the first quarter of this year, they are showing an attainment of 12.55% DBE participation. Next slide, please. So project risks continue to exist. I don't anticipate that they'll go away even after the project is open to the public. This table reflects some of the major risks and the potential impacts to the projects that we're continuing to monitor. Construction costs and other unknown risks continue to diminish as we get closer and closer to being open to the public. Adverse costs or schedule impacts resulting from the effects of COVID-19 have not materialized, and I'd like to think that we'll be able to eliminate this as a risk from the table the next time I come to you for a project update. Next slide. So since we last presented, we have restored Friars Road to the condition it was before we started construction. 2 lanes in each direction are open to traffic, and the responsibility to the roadway has shifted back to the city of San Diego. We started construction of the UTC Transit Center parking structure. Construction of the Nobel Drive trolley station parking structure was completed and open for use in February. Station construction continues to be a priority. Design finishes, the variable message sign, support structure, shelter canopies, and lighting fixtures are all being placed. And then landscaping and signal work also continues at various locations throughout the projects. Next slide. So moving on to construction progress, and the photographs. This here kind of shows the Tecolote Road trolley station. The station is almost 90% complete. The striping of the lot, the finishing of the canopy shelters, and setting the detectable warning pavers on the platform are some of what remains to be done here at this station. Next slide, please. Here you can see the work involved in setting the screen wall tiles. This work is now complete, and our contractor has covered the tile work with black plastic sheeting to help protect it from damage and potential vandalism. Next slide, please. So this is an aerial view of the Claremont station. Work at this station is about 85% complete. Next slide. Here you can see the contractor finishing work on installing the screen wall tile. This work has been completed, and as in the Tecolote station, has been covered with black plastic sheeting. Next slide, please. So this is a shot of the Balboa Avenue Transit Center. This station is about 85% complete. Some of the ongoing work activities here include installing the landscape and irrigation and the barrier railing at the platform. Next slide, please. So screen walls are popular in this presentation. Here's the one at Balboa Station. And as you can see, the tile work is done at that location as well. If you should happen to go drive by along the alignment, I mean, you can see that the stations have been lit, and everybody's can see that they're progressing well. Next slide, please. So this is a shot of the Nobel Drive trolley station and parking structure. The station is about 70% complete. As I mentioned before, the parking structure is open for use, but there is some remaining work to be done before we can say it's 100% complete. Work activities here involve installing the elevator, grading the lower level plaza area, and making surface lot improvements within the mall. Next slide, please. So here's a shot of the VA Medical Center trolley station. This station is about 85% complete. Work at this station has slowed lately. The contractor has been using this station as a high rail access point to allow vehicles better access to the elevated section of the guideway to perform their work. Next slide. So here's another photograph showing the tile work on the wall at the back of the station. Next slide. So this is the newly labeled UC San Diego Central Campus Trolley Station. This station is over 80% complete. Work activities related to the station include completing the elevators and installing the stair steel structures that lead up to the station platform. In this photograph, the stairway structural steel adjacent to the elevator is in the process of being set. The staircase towards the right of the photograph at the very south end of the station has not yet been placed. Next slide, please. And this is the structural steel for the south end of the station. In this photograph, it is in the process of getting prepared for final paint before it's delivered to the site. Next slide, please. Here's the newly labeled UC San Diego Health La Jolla Trolley Station. This station is about 85% complete. So of significance here is the work surrounding the station. Campus Point Drive has been realigned, and improvements along Boyd Drive are nearing completion. I understand that we'll be having an event soon to recognize the completion of Campus Point Drive and the other surface street improvements surrounding the station. Next slide. This photograph is of the Executive Drive trolley station, which is also around 85% complete. Work activities at this location include installing the elevators, the stairways, the light fixtures, and the canopy roofing. Next slide. So this is one of the steel structures going up to the station platform, and in this photograph, the contractor is in the process of putting up the lighting fixtures. Next slide, please. So this is a shot of the UTC Transit Center station and the parking structure. This is the last station on the alignment, and it sits about 71% complete. Most of the work activities on this station are related to installing the elevators and the canopy roofs. Next slide, please. So this is the last construction progress photograph I'm sharing, and it shows how the advanced grading work that we've had to do at this location to accommodate the new UTC Transit Center parking structure. Next slide, please. So through the construction management general contractor model, the contractor for the Midcoast Trolley Project, MCTC, has been able to work with Sandag on several concurrent projects within the Midcoast corridor. In the first quarter of this year, we achieved a significant milestone by completing another one of these concurrent projects, the Gilman Drive Bridge. We expect to complete and open the Rose Creek Bikeway next month. And then lastly, the Voight Drive Improvement Project continues to progress and is anticipated to be complete fall of this year. Next month, we'll be opening all lanes on Voight Drive and the newly aligned Campus Point Drive. This project has been a joint effort between Caltrans, UC San Diego, and Sandags, and it will realign Campus Drive to improve access to the future Voight Drive, the La Jolla Health Center. I always get that because they just put a new name on it, but it's the one at Voight Drive, the station. Next slide, please. So since we last met, crews completed the installation of the community signage and lighting on the Gilman Drive Bridge. The lighting on the bridge is now turned on every day at dusk. The approximate total cost of construction of this bridge is about $21 million. It was funded through a combination of local and private funding sources, including $15.3 million of TransNet dollars. Next slide, please. So public outreach efforts continue. Our process have had to been modified due to COVID-19. Construction tours and in-person media events have been mostly postponed, although we have recently started having some on-site meetings with some of our project stakeholders to show them what's been happening on the project. We continue to provide regularly scheduled virtual updates to several community planning groups, as well as the city council staff from the districts directly impacted by project construction. Lastly, opening day planning efforts have commenced as the project nears its anticipated completion in late 2021. We are working closely with our partners at MTS and UC San Diego in this planning effort. Next slide, please. So before I open it up to any questions, I'd like to kind of share something about Brad as well. I too would like to recognize and thank Brad for his contribution to the region as a member of ITOC. I have a very long working relationship with AGC and AGC members throughout my career at Caltrans, NTDB, and now Sandag. As Alan mentioned prior to the start of this meeting, Brad has been a fantastic partner in helping to advance many of the projects that have been put into place for the benefit of everyone that relies on the vast transportation network we have in the region. I want to personally thank Brad for his service and wish him the very best in whatever he has planned for himself. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions or any comments.
Thanks, Ramon. That's very nice. Good presentation.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. For the clerk, do we have any members of the public who would like to speak on this issue?
No, Chair, I don't see any hands.
Thank you very much, Francesca. All right, any comments from the committee members? Must be a couple. This is my favorite meeting, the presentation about the mid-cuts. There's just the best pictures of what we're doing. So seeing no questions or comments from my fellow committee members, I'll thank you very much for your presentation. And with that, we'll move on to the North Coast Corridor status update.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. I'm Alan Kossip. I'm the I-5 Corridor Director for the North Coast Corridor. Next slide. Just as a way of reminding folks, when we talk about Build NCC, we're really talking about completing 4 major scope elements. There was a double track project at Cardiff, the restoration of the San Alejo Lagoon, a number of bike path rail trail improvements, as well as an extension of the carpool lanes that currently end in Solana Beach, extending them all the way to 78. Next slide. As Ramon mentioned, one of the great things about CMGC is we're able to work on elements of the project of the greater vision as funding and design come on board. And so as we know, large projects like this, the funding isn't available sometimes for the entire project at the very beginning. So this allows us to sort of phase it. And that's what we've done here at NCC. We ended up delivering 6 projects with the contractor, our contractor FSSW, partnership of Skanska, Stacy Whitbeck, and Flatiron. And so we worked through 6 contracts with them and have opened to the public 3 of those already. The double track project is complete, the coastal rail trail element is complete, and the restoration is complete. What's left is the carpool lane. And that, as you can see, we're making good progress on that. Next slide. And one of the important points, to make is, we continue to be on schedule. Major elements of the carpool lanes will be open by the end of this year, by 2021. And we're continuing to be on budget. This last quarter, last time I think we were here, we talked about finishing one of the major risks, which was the foundations in the San Alejo Lagoon. Anytime we get above ground, that's a major cause for celebration, and we have completed the foundation work there. So that's a major accomplishment, and allows us now to move to the deck work. So if you've been driving by, in fact, last night we poured the last slab of the San Alejo Manchester Bridge deck. So making good progress there. We broke ground on some sound wall, about 3/4 of a mile of sound wall constructions in Carlsbad. And in the next month or two, we'll be breaking ground on the last element of the HOV, which is from Palomar Airport Road to 78. So a major accomplishment in January was that the CTC voted $10 million, which was our first installment of funding for that project. And that allows us now to break ground this spring. And so, it may not look it when you drive by, but we're actually much like the transit, the LRT that Ramon talked about. We're in the home stretch, and in the next year, you're going to see some significant new functionality coming on board for the traveling public. So let's spend a little bit of time, next slide, looking at what that may look like. The San Alejo Bridge at Manchester has always been the controlling item for the entire $870 million project. It's just, not only is it the bottleneck for the freeway, you can see, and I think we've talked about here in this meeting, it's also a bottleneck for the lagoon, and it's a bottleneck for bikes and peds who are trying to get from Solana Beach to Encinitas. So everything really revolves around this location, and it's also the most complex to construct. And so I want to point out sort of where we are in this critical path item. If you can see, this is last probably January or so, when we had just finished the foundation work and we had not started the deck pours yet. So I like this photo because it does show how FSSW built a fill in the lagoon in order to do the bridge construction, and we sort of necked down the lagoon there. And so it's important, once we get the bridge work complete, we can remove the false work and start removing that dirt. And that really is the cork in the bottle. So that'll be a major item. Also in the rest of the year, building active transportation, we're going to build a park and ride where number 5 is, which is where our construction field office is. So we're going to build a park and ride there with EV charging, but we're also extending active transportation under the bridge all the way to the visitor center for the San Alejo Lagoon, which is about a half a mile to the west. So that's number 4. So in the next year, a number of efforts there for constructing the bike path and moving utilities. Next slide. This is probably maybe about 3 weeks ago. You can see how the bridge deck is starting to come together and the slabs are getting poured. Next slide. So by the end of the year, it'll start looking like this under the bridge. This is the finished product, a rendering, and what's important to see is the hanging bike and pedestrian bridge that connects Solana Beach and Cardiff. And so as soon as we get that dirt from under the slabs, we'll start building that bridge. So by the end of the year, probably early next spring, that bridge will be complete and open to traffic. Next slide. The aesthetic treatment on the retaining walls. If you're in the lagoon looking up towards the freeway, this is what you see now. That's starting to come together. Next slide. This is the work that's starting. Actually, this is a significant utility corridor for both the city of Encinitas and a number of the utility purveyors, both electrical, sewer, reclaimed water, all go down Manchester. So in order to get to the next slide, which is sort of what the finished product looks like, in the next few months, the first order of work is significant utility relocation. Next slide. And then probably by late this summer, this sort of highlights where the contractor's yard is. We co-locate, which has been another sort of major innovation from the department standpoint. That RE or that construction field office is both co-located with owners, representatives, contractors. Really has helped the collaboration on the project, is having them all in one area. And if you remember, this is a total solar-driven facility as well for the field offices that are there. We'll start breaking that down probably in September so that we can then begin building the park and ride. And then there'll be community gardens up there as well that ultimately get turned over to the Nature Conservancy, which runs the, manages the lagoon. So that's all starting to come together. Next slide. So if you head up north from Manchester, we're now working on the outside because all this outside widening and the paving needs to get finished by the end of the year as well, so that we can get that carpool lane open to 78. And that's progressing on schedule. Next slide. And as I mentioned, we've just started construction of the sound walls in Carlsbad and northern Encinitas. Three sites, about 3/4 of a mile total. Next slide. So I do want to touch on that last piece, which is that piece highlighted in yellow, Palomar Airport Road to 78. This is the piece that we did get funding. Let's go to the next slide. This is the piece that we did get funding from the California Transportation Commission back in January. And much like the work to the south, we'll start building in the median, removing the oleanders, building the new carpool lanes and the new barrier, and then shift to the outside later this year or early next. But construction does begin this spring. Next slide. And so we may have mentioned this at the last meeting, but from a funding standpoint, the challenge has been is that the state's funding is out a couple of years. It's programmed actually in 2023. So, but we're ready now. The design is ready now. Contractors out there. We don't want the contractor to demob and then have to bring them back. That's going to cost us all money. And there'll be, inflation costs as well. So it was really important for us to keep the contractor moving. And so we worked with the CTC in order to put a funding plan in place that they're going to they're going to vote in 3 pieces. This is very sort of unusual, but we're going to vote the funding on an annual basis. And so the first allocation was 10 million. We'll come back to them this summer, fall for the next, and then finally in 12 months from now, we'll come back for our last tranche. At the same time, based on what's happening in Washington, we will work to accelerate that and try to get all the money now. So hopefully that's a good opportunity all coming together. Next slide. One thing I did want to talk about, and we every time I'm here, we do tend to talk a little bit about safety and traffic volumes. And I'd seen a report coming out of FHWA, which is not a surprise, that even though volumes are down across the nation, the number of fatalities is actually up. And that's because we just have a lot of speeders, aggressive drivers, distracted drivers. And so, the department, along with AGC and the contracting community, trying to do everything we can to manage or reduce the speeders. One of the things we're going to try in that last segment, that Palomar Airport Road 78, is the use of orange striping to designate construction zones, just to try to raise people's awareness. And so that'll be a pilot program. It has been done in a couple of other states, but has not yet been tried in California. So but we're going to take that on, and you'll probably start seeing that. We'll do some public outreach so that we don't surprise folks, but you'll start seeing that this summer. Next slide. So 2021, big year for us. We will, as I mentioned, complete the San Alejo Highway Bridge. We'll open to traffic all the way to Palomar Airport Road, and we'll complete the bike bridge that links Cardiff and Encinitas. And with that, I open it up to questions.
Thank you very much, Alan. For the clerk, do we have any members of the public who would like to speak on this issue?
No, Chair, I don't see any hands.
Thank you, Francesca. So back to committee. I see Brad has his hand up. Brad?
Alan, thank you. It's always a great presentation you've done. I still remember when you presented in front of a hostile crowd in Del Mar, Solana Beach, when Christine Kehoe's bill was passed. So this is a great job you're doing. Question on the I-5 going north there, on all the widening on the outside, it's just amazing to me when you get to the bridges, how close the columns are. It's so wide. And then when you get to the bridges, how do you intend to widen underneath those bridges when the columns are so close to the right side of the road? I'm just curious. It seems awfully tight.
So, you know, if you remember back to the environmental document, this project is sort of phase one of the ultimate two-phase project. So we're adding one lane in each direction now. The environmental document cleared a second lane to be added sometime in the future with funding. So with that in mind, we designed it to try to not have any throwaway, but to build for the future and try to find that sweet spot, right? So as we get to bridges, we made the decision case by case not to remove and replace and all the bridges to their ultimate width. And so in some bridges, we're going to have to restripe to get to 11-foot lanes and reduce shoulder widths in those short distances around those bridges, and then go back out to more of a standard design. Manchester is the one place where we're actually building the ultimate bridge. And so when we open it, it's going to look wider than normal. But that's because we wanted to get in and get out of the lagoon in one time. We didn't want to construct out there twice. And so it is kind of a case by case. And we are going back now and retrofitting some of the bridge rails and the barriers around columns as well, Brad. So
Alan, just to follow up though, I'm at the bridges that are over the freeway. It just seems that when I'm just looking at the widening that you're doing near Poinsettia and all that, but when you get to the bridge that's over the freeway, it seems that right column is awfully tight. I'm just curious. So it's just amazing. I guess you guys, you're not rebuilding those bridges then. You're just not. Yeah.
In phase two, they get rebuilt.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Stuart, I see your hand is up as well.
Yeah, thank you. As always, Alan, great presentation. The thing I was kind of curious about is how is it decided where you actually do build sound walls and where you don't? Is there like sort of roadside testing that you do, and if the noise is exceeding a certain level, then you say, hey, we've got to do something about this? And then the other thing I'm kind of curious about is the efficiency of sound walls versus natural elements and plantings. And then lastly, related to this, is there sort of ongoing study that is done either by Caltrans or is there some research institute or something or other that's ongoing testing the efficiency of different materials to continue to be taking advantage of technology to improve the efficiency of sound walls when they're being built, configurations as well as materials, I guess? Thanks.
So sound walls are some of the hardest things that we do in terms of mitigating noise, obviously very controversial from both the public's perspective and can be very costly, as you point out. There's actually federal protocol that sort of describes when you can mitigate and what are the conditions of mitigating. And that's consistent sort of across the nation. And so we do things kind of what's called a reasonable feasible study to try to determine how much sound reduction you can get. And then there are certain caps that the federal government puts on how much you can invest per resident. And so that is a formal study, and we share that with the public. And there are places where you really can't, especially in I-5, it's complex because of the topography, and that we can't really find a solution that mitigates it significantly, right? So if you can't achieve more than a 5 dB reduction, most people won't notice. And so it's not a significant reduction. So in those cases, we may make a decision not to provide mitigation. If folks are significantly impacted, severely impacted, and some of those homes have been there prior to the freeway. The federal government does have a program where we actually do interior mitigation in lieu of sound walls. So we'll end up double painting or air conditioning or that kind of thing. And that's also governed by certain protocol from FHWA. In terms of, and I have a feeling I'm going to forget one of the questions, but in terms of studies, yes. One of the things actually we did up in Solana Beach was we looked at regrinding the pavement differently. And there are different styles of the grooving, and the grooving is what causes some of the noise. And we're trying to change the frequency of it to make it less obtrusive. And so there's a lot of work going on, what's called whisper grind or quiet grind. But that's fairly costly as well to do the entire, all the lanes up to 20 miles. And right now the federal government does not acknowledge that as mitigation, although from the public standpoint, we've gotten very favorable responses. And I'm sorry, Stuart, I missed the second question.
Yeah, the part in the middle there is I'm just curious as to whether natural elements and plantings have much of a role in sound mitigation, or is that really more, aesthetic as opposed to sound?
The numbers would say that the landscaping does not do a significant mitigation, but I would say that the public's perception is it does. And so we get a lot of folks who want denser planting, but I think you would need a very large width and dense in order to make any type of impact. Part of it, you pretty much have to break the line of sight between the vehicle or or the stack or the wheels and the receptor.
Gotcha. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And if I could just, I did want to echo what Ramon said about Brad and AGC. Have always appreciated the partnership. Building these projects is not easy. And there are always challenges along the way. And during those tough periods, we appreciate Brad and AGC's support. And we've always been good partners. So good luck. Have a great retirement.
I agree, Alan. You've done a great job, Caltrans. A good group of people there. Thank you.
All right. So scrolling through our list of attendees, are there any other committee members that have questions for Alan? Alan, I'm probably the only one, but the most exciting part of your presentation for me was the orange stripes. That, as a traffic engineer, those types of changes are paradigm. So is this an experiment through the devices committee? So there'll be some kind of report or conclusions drawn at the end about how effective it was, and maybe,
yes.
So we might see more if it works. That's interesting.
And you'll also see us try different patterns out there to see how the public responds in terms of length of stripe or repetition of stripe and that sort of thing. So, but we are doing this with the FHWA as well as partnership.
Great. Along those same lines, the reversing curves around the bridge deck, are those, is there a scheduled date for flopping traffic back onto the center or onto the deck when we'll see those curves go away?
Yeah, it should be coming up here in, I would think, late summer.
Okay. I noticed, I just happened to commute that way, and I noticed that those curves generate their own little congestion point as people just kind of tap their brakes as they negotiate those curves.
It's probably sooner than you think, because if the deck got poured last night, we shouldn't be more than a few months away from opening it up.
Perfect. And it's good to hear that the foundations are sticking out of the ground. That's true. Anytime you're working in the ground, there's always uncertainties with not being able to see what you're trying to work with. I know those foundations were much deeper than originally thought they would be. When was that discovered? Was that in the planning, the design, or the construction phase?
So originally they were designed, I think, at 230 feet deep, 10 feet in diameter. That's how we designed them. When we got into construction, we had some challenges constructing them in an efficient manner. And so we ended up with the contractor changing the design. So it was more of a constructability issue. So we went down another 40 or 50 feet just to make them easier to construct.
So no 240-foot deep test bores that were done prior to the actual excavation. That's just too deep to do anything like that?
Well, we did have a number of log test borings that deep. The problem was when we went to 10 feet and you try to pull the shell out and pour it, how does the material around it not cave in? And it wasn't holding up as well as we would have liked. So, trying to get a perfect column 200 some odd feet deep is the difficulty, right? And so in lieu of getting a perfect column with perfect edges, you can go deeper and get more friction. And so that was our final decision.
Gotcha. Well, a great presentation, a lot of excellent progress made there. So thank you very much for your presentation today. Seeing no more comments from the committee members, we will receive and file your report. Thank you very much, and move on to item number 14, which is a continuation of public comments. Francesca, are there any members of the public who would like to speak on items that were not on the agenda at this point in the meeting?
No, Chair, I don't see any hands.
All right, so item 14 is, well, are there any committee members that would like to make any comment for the greater good? Once again, thanks a lot, Brad. Wish you well. Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. All right, so our next meeting, it's on the agenda, is May 12th, 9:30. Is that's still current, Ariana?
That is correct.
All right, so we will reconvene May 12th, and with that, we will go ahead and adjourn today's meeting. I'd like to thank everyone, and we will see you in May.